Already there.
I thought so, but
Well, you know, Maggie did talk about the party that we had here Friday. I know many of you were here. A lot of music, a lot of wild dancing.
a lot of wild drumming.
Angelo and Stella got up dancing there. It got pretty wild. I thought I was going to have to change my talk today to the wages of sin. But, you know, everybody was getting really crazy, and I do try to think of, you know, where do these things fit in my talk. And I thought about a quote from Mark Twain that says, when we realize we're all totally mad, the mysteries disappear and life stands explained. That pretty much says it, but that's a pretty short talk, so I thought I'd talk about some of the mysteries anyway. And you know, this is the topic of freedom, and for July, and you know, in the United States we're very much into individual freedom. That's what we really push and what we really idolize. We don't think it through a lot. I mean, really, if I have individual freedom, everything in that purse I should be able to take, right? If I feel like going out and smashing everyone's windows, why not? I'm individually free to do whatever I want, and all of you want me to be that way. Of course, as a country, we make tens of thousands of laws to restrict our individual freedom. Not all of those laws are great, but you know, many of them I think we all agree that we need. So if individual freedom is such a wonderful thing, why would it cause us so much problems? And I think maybe to understand freedom, we need to understand who we really are. And Oscar Wilde said, "Be who you are. Everyone else is already taken." Have you heard people say that? I'm not myself today. When they do, I always ask them who they are, because you know, they may be Jack the Ripper that day. You want to know who they are, but knowing who we are is really a key to understanding freedom, and it's very important too, because you've got to really know who you are to be afraid well. Most of us aren't afraid well. We don't do fear very well. How many people are afraid of spiders? Do you have any people here? You know, there's a number of people who just totally freak out on spiders. Now, you have about a 1 in 100 million chance of dying from a spider bite. Across the whole world, 4 people a year die from a spider bite. Now, how many of you are deathly afraid of glazed donuts? Because when we see one, we should scream and go running, because many more people in our culture die of obesity-related diseases than die of spiders. See, we don't understand that very well, because we don't really understand who we are, and our fears get all mixed up. And you know, our fears, really, of course, what they do is they harm us and they imprison us. They cause this stress in our bodies. They put out the hormones that actually do destructive work in our body, and even worse, in our minds and our spirits, of course, by clogging us up. And to get through those fears, we need to understand who we really are. And so when we get back to the basics, I mean, at least we know that physically we're each a unique individual. I mean, well, sure, we're all made out of the same molecules. I mean, if the molecules in all of us, if you exchange those, they'd all be exactly the same. And you'd have to go further and say we're all made out of the same atoms and protons and electrons of everything around us. I mean, we're made out of the same thing that those walls are. And maybe what makes it a little worse is that we're all made out of used materials. Sorry, but none of you are new. It's all recycled materials that make you up. The very atoms that make us and the molecules, I mean, at some point they may have been a cow, they may have been a worm, probably dirt at some point, they may have been other human beings. So it makes it harder to think of us as unique individuals. But, you know, we do think of ourselves as separate, although even then we know that if you look at the very microscopic aspect of it, we tend to think of our skins as barriers, borders, and we're inside and everything else is outside. But if you look at it at a high enough resolution, of course, you find that there's actually an exchange of molecules that are happening all of the time. An exchange of energy that's happening all the time. When you touch someone, you leave some of yourself with them, and you take some of them with you, literally. And every molecule in our body is changing. You know, your liver this week was actually not your liver last week. It's whole different molecules that make you up. So that physically, we're actually not separate, unique human beings. Spiritually, of course, we are. I mean, if you think, has there always eternally been a Bob Hand? Well, of course, yes. But what about the rest of you? Has there always eternally been billions and billions and billions and billions of separate spiritual beings? I don't know. You know, that seems hard to imagine, that the very essence of the beginning of everything was billions and billions of billions of different separate spiritual beings. So maybe to understand this again, to understand who we really are, let's go back to the beginning. We've talked about that before in the Gospel of Thomas, where Jesus says, return to the beginning. And my son Benjamin, for Father's Day, got me a book, The Universe from Nothing. Why is there something instead of nothing? And it's an interesting book. It is quite complicated. They talk a lot about cosmology and relativity theory, although the vast majority of it is quantum theory and explaining all of this, how you get something from nothing with quantum theory. You know, the book's several hundred pages. Being brilliant, I'm going to summarize that in 3 or 4 sentences. And really, because what the basics of it is we all know, we've talked about this, that quantum theory is about probability. That things aren't actually anywhere or moving at any speed until you observe them. So, you know, an electron, you can't say it's right there. You just say it has a probability of being there. It has various probabilities of being other places. And that's what quantum theory is about. Well, when you get to nothing, what's the status of nothing? Now, understand, we're not talking about empty space. We know that empty space isn't nothing. And I'm going to throw this in because everybody's talking about it, that they just discovered the God particle. Now, it has nothing more to do with God than every other particle does. I mean, it's kind of like saying the carburetor is the God part of a motor. Well, yes, it's needed, but so is the rest of the motor. And in the standard model of the universe, you need to have what's called the Higgs boson. You also need the proton and the electron and the neutron and all of these other things. So it's not that it's any more special, it's just that it hadn't been verified yet. And if anybody wants to talk about what it is, it's what gives mass to the universe, and I'll be happy to discuss that.